Chapter 10 Magic Touch, Death in the Bathtub, Messenger with Keepsakes. We had moved into our present house in the autumn of the second year where we were married. The quaincy apartment we had lived until then was slated for renovation. We looked for a cheap, convenient apartment to move into, but finding such a place was not easy with our budget. When we heard this, my uncle suggested that we move into a house he owned in Setagaya. He had bought in his youth and lived there for 10 years. He wanted to tear the old place down and put up something more functional, but architectural regulations prevented him from building the kind of house he wanted. He was waiting for a rumored relaxation of the rules to take effect, but if he left the place vacant in the meantime, he would have to pay the property taxes. And if he rented it to strangers, there could be trouble when he asked them to vacate. From us, he would take only a nominal rent to cover the taxes, but in return, he wanted us to agree to give up the place with 3 months' notice when the time came. We had no problem with that. The part about the taxes was not entirely clear to us, but we jumped at the chance to live in a real house, if only for a little while, paying the kind of rent we had been paying to live in apartment, and a very cheap apartment at that. The house was pretty far from the nearest station on the Odakyu line, but it was in a quiet residential neighborhood and it had its own small yard. Even though it didn't belong to us, it gave us the feeling, once we moved in, that we were now part of a real household. My mother's younger brother, this uncle of mine, never made any demands on us. He was kind of a cool guy, I suppose, but there was something almost uncanny about him in the way he left us alone. Still, he was my favorite relative. He had graduated from a college in Tokyo and gone to work as a radio announcer. But when he got sick of the work after 10 years, he quit the station and opened a bar on Ginza. It was an almost austere little place, but it became widely known for the authenticity of its cocktails. And within a few years, my uncle was running a string of bars and restaurants. Every one of his establishments did extremely well. Apparently, he had that special spark you need for business. Once, while I was still in college, I asked him why every place he opened was such a success. In the very same location where one restaurant had failed on the Ginza, he might open up the same kind of restaurant and do just fine. Why was that? He held the palms of both hands out for me to see. "It's my magic touch," he said, without a hint of humor. And that was all he said. Maybe he really did have a magic touch, but he also had a talent for finding capable people to work for him. He paid them high salaries and treated them well, and they in turn worked hard for him. "When I know I've got the right guy, I put away the bills in his hands and let him do his thing," he once told me. "You've got to spend your money for the things that money can buy, not worry about profit or loss. Save your energy for the things that money can't buy." He married late in life. Only after he had achieved financial success in his mid-40s did he settle down. His wife was a divorcee, 3 or 4 years his junior, and she brought her own considerable assets to the marriage. My uncle never told me how he happened to meet her, and all I could tell about her was that she was a quiet sort of woman of good background. They had no children. She had apparently had no children with her first husband either, which may have been the reason for the divorce. In any case, though not exactly a rich man, my uncle was in a position in his mid-40s where it was no longer necessary for him to break his back for money. In addition to the profits from his restaurants and bars, he had rental income from several houses and condos that he owned, plus steady dividend income from investments. With its reputation for respectable businesses and modest lifestyles, the family tended to see my uncle as something of a black sheep, and he had never shown much inclination for consorting with relatives. As his only nephew, though, I had always been of some concern to him, especially after my mother died the year I entered college, and I had a falling out with my father, who remarried. When I was living the lonely life of a poor college student in Tokyo, my uncle often treated me to dinner in one or another of his Ginza restaurants. He and his wife now lived in a condo on a hill in Azabu rather than be bothered with taking care of a house. He was not given to indulging in luxuries, but he did have one hobby, which was the purchase of rare automobiles. He kept a Jaguar and an Alfa Romeo in the garage, both of them nearly antiques and extremely well cared for, as shiny as newborn babes. On the phone with my uncle about something else, I took the opportunity to ask him what he knew about Mei Kasahara's family. "Kasahara, you say?" He took a moment to think. "Never heard of them. I was a bachelor when I lived there. Never had anything to do with the neighbors." Actually, it's the house opposite theirs I'm curious about. The vacant house on the other side of the alley from their backyard, I said. I guess somebody named Miyawaki used to live there. Now it's all boarded up. Oh, Miyawaki. Sure, I knew him, said my uncle. He used to own a few restaurants. Had one on the Ginza too. I met him professionally a few times. His places were nothing much, tell you the truth, but he had good location. I thought he was doing alright. He was a nice guy, but kind of a spoiled rich kid type. He had never had to work hard, or he just never got the hang of it or something, but he never quite grew up. Somebody got him going on the stock market, took him for everything he had house, land, businesses, everything. And the timing couldn't have been worse. He was trying to open a new place, had his house and land up as collateral. Bang, the whole thing. Had a couple of daughters, I think, college age. The house has been empty ever since, I guess. No kidding. I'll bet the title's a mess, and his assets have been frozen or something. You'd better not touch that place, no matter what kind of bargain they're offering you. Who? Me? I laughed. I could never afford a place like that, but what do you mean? I looked into that house when I bought mine. There's something wrong with it. You mean like ghosts? Maybe not ghosts, but I've never heard anything good about the place, my uncle said. Some fairly well-known army guy lived there till the end of the war. Colonel somebody or other, a real super elite officer. The troops under his command in North China won all kinds of decorations. But they did some terrible things there, executing 500 POWs, forcing tens of thousands of farmers to work for them until half of them dropped dead, stuff like that. These are the stories that were going around. So I don't know how much is true. He was called home just before the end of the war. So he was here for the surrender, and he could see from what was going on that he was likely to be tried as a war criminal. The guys who had gone crazy in China, the generals, the field officers, were being dragged away by the MPs. Well, he had no intention of being put on trial. He was not going to be made a spectacle of and hanged in the bargain. He preferred to take his own life rather than let that happen. So one day, when he saw a GI stop a jeep in front of his house, he blew his brains out on the spot. He would have preferred to slit his stomach open the old-fashioned samurai way, but there was no time for that. His wife hanged herself in the kitchen to accompany her husband in death. Wow. Anyhow, it turned out the GI was just an ordinary GI, looking for his girlfriend. He was lost. He wanted to ask somebody directions. You know how tough it is to find your way around that place. Deciding it's your time to die, that can't be easy for anybody. No, it can't be. The house was vacant for a while after that, until an actress bought it, a movie actress. You don't know her name. She was around long before your time, and she was never very famous. She lived there, say, 10 years or so, just she and her maid. She was single. A few years after she moved in, she contracted some eye disease. Everything looked cloudy to her, even close up. But she was an actress after all. She couldn't work with glasses on. And contact lenses were a new thing back then. They weren't very good and almost nobody used them. So before the crew shot a scene, she would always go over the layout and memorize how many steps she had to take from A to B. She managed one way or another. They were pretty simple films. Those old Shochiku domestic dramas. Everything was more relaxed in those days. Then one day, after she had checked over the set and gone back to her dressing room, a young cameraman who didn't know what was going on moved the props and things just a little bit. Uh-oh. She missed her footing, fell over, and couldn't walk after that. And her vision started getting even worse. She was practically blind. What a shame. She was still young and pretty. Of course, her movie-making days were over. All she could do was stay at home. And then the maid took all her money and ran off with some guy. This maid was the one person she knew she could trust, dependent on her for everything. And the woman took her savings, her stocks, everything. Boy, talk about terrible stories. So what do you think she did? Well, obviously this story can't have a bright, happy ending. No, obviously, said the uncle. She filled the tub, stuck her face in, and drowned herself. You realize, of course, that to die that way, you have to be pretty damn determined. Nothing bright and happy about that. No, nothing bright and happy. Miyawaki bought the property soon afterward. I mean, it's a nice place. Everybody wants it when they see it. The neighborhood is pleasant. The plot is on high ground and gets good sunlight. The lot is big. But Miyawaki had heard the dark stories about the people who had lived there. So he had the whole thing torn down, foundation and all, and put up a new house. He even had Shinto priest come in to do a purification, but that wasn't enough, I guess. Bad things happen to anybody who lives there. It's just one of those pieces of land. They exist, that's all. I wouldn't take it if they gave it to me. After shopping at the supermarket, I organized my ingredients for making dinner. I then took in the laundry, folded it neatly and put it away. Back in the kitchen, I made myself a pot of coffee. This was a nice, quiet day without calls from anybody. I stretched out on the sofa and read a book. There was no one to disturb my reading. Every once in a while, the wind-up bird would crake in the backyard. It was virtually the only sound I heard all day. Someone rang the front doorbell at 4 o'clock. It was the postman. "Registered mail," he said, and handed me a thick envelope. I took it and put my seal on the receipt. This was no ordinary envelope. It was made of old-fashioned heavy rice paper, and someone had gone to the trouble of writing my name and address on it with a brush in bold black characters. The sender's name on the black was Tokutaro Mamiya, and addressed somewhere in Hiroshima Prefecture. I had absolutely no knowledge of either. Judging from the brushwork, this Tokutaro Mamiya was a man of advanced age. No one knew how to write like that anymore. I sat on a sofa and used a scissor to cut the envelope open. The letter itself, just as old-fashioned as the envelope, was written on rolled rice paper in a flowing hand by an obviously cultivated person. Lacking such cultivation myself, I could hardly read it. The sentence style matched the handwriting in its extreme formality, which only complicated the process. But with enough time, I managed to decipher the general meaning. It said that old Mr. Honda, the fortune teller whom Kumiko and I had gone to see so long ago, had died of a heart attack 2 weeks earlier in his Meguro home. Living alone, he had died without company, but the doctors believed that he had gone quickly and without a great deal of suffering. Perhaps the one bright spot in this sad tale. The maid had found him in the morning, slumped forward on the low table of his food warmer. The letter writer, Tokutaro Mamiya, had been stationed in Manchuria as a first lieutenant and had chanced to share the dangers of war with Corporal Oishi Honda. Now, in compliance with the strong wishes of the deceased, and in the absence of the surviving relatives, Mamiya had undertaken the task of distributing the keepsakes. The deceased had left behind extremely minute written instructions in this regard. The detailed and meticulous will suggests that Mr. Honda had anticipated his own impending death. It states explicitly that he would be extremely pleased if you, Mr. Toru Okada, would be so kind as to receive a certain item as a remembrance of him. I can imagine how very busy you must be, Mr. Okada, but I can assure you, as an old comrade in arms of the deceased, with few years to look forward to myself, that I could have no greater joy than if you were indeed to be so kind as to receive this item as a small remembrance of the late Mr. Honda. The letter concluded with the address at which Mr. Mamiya was presently staying in Tokyo, care of someone else named Mamiya in Hongo, Tukom, Bunkyo Ward. I imagine he must be in the house of a relative. I wrote my reply at the kitchen table. I had hoped to keep the postcard short and simple, but once I had pen in hand, those few concise phrases were not forthcoming. I was fortunate enough to have known the late Mr. Honda and benefited from our brief acquaintance. The news that he is no longer living brings back memories of those times. Our ages were very different, of course, and our association lasted but a single year. Yet I always used to feel there was something about the deceased that moved people deeply. To be quite honest, I would never have imagined that Mr. Honda would name me specifically to be the recipient of a keepsake. Nor am I certain that I am even qualified to receive anything from him. But if such was his wish, then I will certainly do so with all due respect. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. When I dropped the card into the nearest mailbox, I found myself murmuring old Honda's verse. "Dying is the only way for you to float free, Nomonhan." It was close to 10 before Komiko came home from work. She had called before 6 to say that she would be late again today, that I should have dinner without her and she would grab something outside. "Fine," I said, and ate a simple meal. Again, I stayed home alone reading a book. When she came in, Kumiko said she wanted a few sips of beer. We shared a mid-sized bottle. She looked tired. Elle was on the kitchen table. She rested her chin in her hands and said little when I spoke to her. She seemed preoccupied. I told her that Mr. Honda had died. "Oh, really?" she said with a sigh. "Oh, well, he was getting on in years, and he was almost deaf." When I said that he had left a keepsake for me, though, she was shocked, as if something had suddenly fallen out of the sky. For you? She exclaimed, her eyebrows twisting into a frown. Yeah, weird, isn't it? He must have liked you. How could that be? I never really talked to the guy, I said. At least I never said much. And even if I did, he couldn't hear anything. We used to sit and listen to his stories once a month, and all we ever heard from him was the Battle of Nomonhan. How they threw Molotov cocktails, and which tank burned, and which tank didn't burn, that kind of stuff. Don't ask me, said Kumiko. He must have liked something about you. I don't understand people like that. What's in their minds? After that, she went silent again. It was a strained silence. I glanced at the calendar on the wall. Her period was not due yet. I imagined that something unpleasant might have happened at the office. Working too hard? I asked. A little, Kumiko said, after taking a sip of beer and staring at what left in her glass. There was an almost defiant tone in her voice. Sorry I was so late. But you know how it is with magazine work when we get busy. And it's not as if I do this all the time. I get them to give me less overtime than most. They know I have a husband to go home to. I nodded. I'm not blaming you, I said. I know you have to work late sometimes. I was just worried you're letting yourself get tired out. She took a long shower. I drank my beer and flipped through a weekly magazine that she had brought home. I showed my hand in my pants pocket and found the pay there from my recent little part-time job. I hadn't even taken the cash from the envelope. Another thing I had done was tell Kumiko about the job. Not that I had been hiding it from her, but I had let the opportunity to mention it slip by, and there had never been another one. As time passed, I found it harder to bring up the subject for some strange reason. All I would have had to say was, I met this odd 16-year-old girl from down the street and took a job with her doing a survey for a wig maker. The pay was pretty good too. And Kumiko could have said, Oh really? Isn't that nice? And that might have been the end of it. Or not. She might have wanted to know more about Mei Kasahara. She might have bothered that I was making friends with a 16-year-old girl. Then I would have had to tell her about Mei Kasahara and explain in detail where, when, and how we happened to meet. But I'm not very good at giving people orderly explanation of things. I took the money from the envelope and put it in my wallet. The envelope itself I crumpled and threw in the wastebasket. So this was how secrets got started. I thought to myself. People constructed them little by little. I had not consciously intended to keep Mei Kasahara a secret from Kumiko. My relationship with her was not that big a deal. Finally, whether I mentioned or not was of no consequence. Once it had flowed down a certain delicate channel, however, it had become cloaked in the opacity of secretiveness, whatever my original intention may have been. The same thing happened with Kreta Kano. I had told Kumiko that Malta Kano's younger sister had come to the house, that her name was Kreta, that she dressed in early 60s style, that she took samples of her tap water, but I had remained silent on the fact that she had afterward begun to make startling revelations to me, and had vanished without a word before reaching the end. Kreta Kano's story had been too far out. I could never have recreated the nuances and conveyed them to Kumiko, so I had not tried. But then again, Kumiko might have been less than pleased that Kreta Kano had stayed here long after her business was through, and made all kinds of troubling personal confessions to me. And so that became another one of my little secrets. Maybe Kumiko had the same kind of secrets that she was keeping from me. With my own fund of secrets, I was in no position to blame her if she did, of course. Between the two of us, I was surely the more secretive. She tended to say what she was thinking. She was the type of person who thought things out while speaking. I was not like that. Uneasy with these ruminations, I walked toward the bathroom. The door was wide open. I stood in the doorway and looked at Kumiko from behind. She had changed into solid blue pajamas and was standing in front of the mirror, drying her hair with a towel. About a job for me, I said. I have been thinking about it. I've asked friends to be on the lookout, and I've tried a few places myself. There are jobs out there, so I can work anytime I decide to work. I can start tomorrow if I make up my mind to it. It's making up my mind that's hard. I'm just not sure. I'm not sure if it's okay for me to pick a job out of a hat like that. That's why I keep telling you to do what you want, she said, while looking at herself in the mirror. You don't have to find a job right away. If you're worried about the economics of it, you don't have to worry. If it makes you uneasy not to have a job, if it's a burden to you to have me be the only one working outside the house while you stay at home and take care of the housework, then take some job, any job, for a while. I don't care. Of course, I'll have to find a job eventually. I know that. You know that. I can't go on hanging around like this forever. And I will find a job sooner or later. It's just that right now, I don't know what kind of job I should take. For a while after I quit, I just figured I'd take some other law-related job. I do have connections in the field, but now I can't get myself into that mood. The more time that goes by, the less interest I have in law. I feel more and more that it's simply not the work for me. Kumiko looked at me in the mirror. I went on. But knowing what I don't want to do doesn't help me figure out what I do want to do. I could do just about anything if somebody made me, but I don't have an image of the one thing I really want to do. That's my problem now. I can't find the image. So then, she said, putting her towel down and turning to face me. If you're tired of law, don't do it anymore. Just forget about the bar exam. Don't get all worked up about finding a job. If you can't find the image, wait until it forms by itself. What's wrong with that? I nodded. I just wanted to make sure I had explained to you exactly how I felt. Good, she said. I went to the kitchen and washed my glass. She came in from the bathroom and sat at the kitchen table. Guess who called me this afternoon? She said. My brother. Oh? He's thinking of running for office. In fact, he's just about decided to do it. Running for office? This came as such a shock to me, I could hardly speak for a moment. You mean for the diet? That's right. They're asking him to run for my uncle's seat in Niigata. I thought it was all set for your uncle's son to succeed him. He was going to resign his directorship at Dentsu or something and go back to Niigata. She started cleaning her ears with a cotton swab. That was the plan, but my cousin doesn't want to do it. He's got his family in Tokyo and he enjoys his work. He's not ready to give up such an important post with the world's largest advertising firm and move back to the wilds of Niigata just to become a diet member. The main opposition is from his wife. She doesn't want him sacrificing the family to run for office. The elder brother of Kumiko's father had spent 4 or 5 terms in the lower house, representing that electoral district in Niigata. While not exactly a heavyweight, he had compiled a fairly impressive record, rising at one point to a minor cabinet post. Now, however, advanced age and heart disease would make it impossible for him to enter the next election, which meant that someone would have to succeed to his constituency. This uncle had 2 sons, but the elder had never intended to go into politics, and so the younger was the obvious choice. Now the people in the district are dying to have my brother run. They want somebody young and smart and energetic, somebody who can serve for several terms, with the talent to become a major power in the central government. My brother has the name recognition. He'll attract the young vote. He's perfect. True, he can schmooze with the locals, but the support organization is strong, and they'll take care of that. Plus, if he wants to go on living in Tokyo, that's no problem. All he has to do is show up for the election. I had trouble picturing Noboru Wataya as a diet member. What do you think of all this? I asked. He's got nothing to do with me. He can become a diet member or an astronaut for all I care. But why did he make a point of coming to you for advice? Don't be ridiculous, she said with a dry voice. He wasn't asking my advice. You know, he'd never do that. He was just keeping me informed as a member of the family. I see, I said. Still, if he's going to run for the diet, won't it be a problem that he's divorced and single? I wonder, said Kumiko. I don't know anything about politics or elections or anything. They just don't interest me. But anyway, I'm pretty sure he'll never get married again. To anybody. He should never have gotten married in the first place. That's not what he wants out of his life. He's after something else. Something completely different from what you or I want. I know that for sure. Oh really? Kumiko wrapped 2 used cotton swabs in a tissue and threw them in the wastebasket. Then she raised her face and looked straight at me. I once saw him masturbating. I opened the door and there he was. So what? Everybody masturbates, I said. No, you don't understand, she said. Then she sighed. It happened maybe 2 years after my sister died. He was probably in college and I was something like a 3rd grader. My mother had wavered between getting rid of my sister's things and putting them away, and in the end she decided to keep them, thinking I might wear them when I got older. She had put them in a carton in a closet. My brother had taken them out and was smelling them and doing it. I kept silent. I was just a little girl then. I didn't know anything about sex. I really didn't know what he was doing. but I could tell that it was something twisted, something I wasn't supposed to see, something much deeper than it appeared on the surface. Kumiko shook her head. Does Noboru Wataya know you saw him? Of course. We looked right into each other's eyes. I nodded. And how about your sister's clothes? I asked. Did you wear them when you got bigger? No way, she said. So you think he was in love with your sister? I wonder, said Kumiko. I'm not even sure he had a sexual interest in her, but he certainly had something, and I suspect he's never been able to get away from that something. That's what I mean when I say he should never have gotten married in the first place. Kumiko felt silent. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Then she spoke first. In that sense, I think he may have serious psychological problems. Of course, we all have psychological problems to some extent, but his are a lot worse than whatever you or I might have. They are a lot deeper and more persistent, and he has no intention of letting these scars or weaknesses or whatever they are seen by anybody else, ever. Do you understand what I'm saying? This election coming up, it worries me. Worries you? How's that? I don't know. It just does, she said. Anyhow, I'm tired. I can't think anymore today. Let's go to bed. Brushing my teeth in the bathroom, I studied my face in the mirror. For over 2 months now, since quitting my job, I had rarely entered the outside world. I had been moving back and forth between the neighborhood shops, the ward pool, and this house. Aside from Ginza and that hotel in Shinagawa, the farthest point I had traveled from home was the cleaners by the station, and in all that time, I had hardly seen anyone. Aside from Kumiko, the only people I could be said to have seen in 2 months were Malta and Kreta Kano and Mei Kasahara. It was a narrow world, a world that was standing still, but the narrower it became, and the more it betook of stillness, the more of this world that enveloped me seemed to overflow with things and people that could only be called strange. They had been there all the while, it seemed, waiting in the shadows for me to stop moving, and every time the wind-up bird came to my yard to wind its spring, the world descended more deeply into chaos. I rinsed my mouth and went on looking at my face for a time. I can't find the image, I said to myself. I'm 30, I'm standing still, and I can't find the image. When I went from the bathroom to the bedroom, Kumiko was asleep.